All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. This is the fifth day of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and according to reports that have come in through the night, there have been blasts that have been reported through the night as the Russians have laid siege to Kyiv and to other cities in Ukraine. The Ukrainian state services, in a brief statement, have reported blasts in the capital and also in the second largest Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, adding that Kyiv had been fairly quiet prior to the blasts. The Russian troops are slowly inching closer to the capital, and now there are fresh satellite images of Russian convoys of tanks and armor that is now moving towards Kyiv. The images reveal the extent of deployment of the Russian ground forces that are moving in the direction of the Ukrainian capital from approximately about 40 miles away. The convoy is said to be towards the northeast of the Ukrainian city of Kyiv, and it reportedly contains fuel, logistics and armored vehicles, including tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles and also self-propelled artillery. Now, according to a statement released by Maxar, shelling has now started in cities near the capital. The Ukrainian authorities have also released visuals of burnt-out military vehicles from the city of Bucha. Bucha lies on the outskirts of Kyiv, just 32 kilometers from the capital. The Bucha City Council has also released footage of the burnt-out military vehicles that is still seen smouldering on the streets. Earlier on Sunday, Anton Heroshenko, an advisor to Ukraine's interior minister, said that fighting was underway in Bucha with the Russian security forces who are trying to advance towards Kyiv. Images have also surfaced from the city of Irpin, where residential buildings were seen ablaze. Authorities have confirmed that the residential buildings were hit by shelling, and evacuation and rescue operations are currently underway. Irpin lies about 26 kilometers north of the capital city of Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the next 24 hours are going to be very crucial in the fight against the Russians. Kyiv's mayor has confirmed that 9 civilians and 1 child has been killed in the fighting in the last 24 hours, adding that civilians can be evacuated as Russian troops have blocked all exits and are also positioned at the borders of the capital. And this, of course, makes the evacuation of common citizens that much more harder. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what Russia intends to do in this invasion that it has launched on Ukraine, we are joined in by Mr. Robert Kelly, an American political analyst who is joining us from Busan in South Korea. Now, Mr. Kelly, this of course is a turn of events which perhaps no one expected. On the very first day of invasion, the Russian troops were on the gates of Kyiv, and now it's the fifth day of invasion and they're still stuck there. Has Russia lost a bit of its momentum in the war that it has now waged on Ukraine?
Yeah, I think it has. And I think the Ukrainian government's actually doing a really great job sort of popularizing this and getting this out there into global media, right? I mean, if you sort of follow the debate that's out there sort of on the internet and Twitter and whatever, I think there's sort of a growing perception that the Ukrainians might win this or at least drag it out, and that if the Ukrainians can hang on for another week or two, there's going to be a lot of pressure, I think, particularly inside Europe, to start supporting the Ukrainian resistance directly with arms shipments. In fact, that's already beginning to happen. I think a lot of people are surprised that the Russians are doing so poorly, but it's also important to note that the Russians haven't actually brought in a lot of really, really heavy equipment yet. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could substantially sort of shell Kyiv and other cities. And I think they're a little bit loath to do that. I mean, Putin is pretty aware. I think that the Russians knew that they were going to be pretty isolated on this one. And, you know, if there's a huge body count and there are atrocities and dead babies on children on CNN and stuff like that, the Russians are going to suffer pretty high costs. And I think that's one of the reasons why. But, you know, if the Russians are still stalemated with the Ukrainians in like 2 weeks, the level of violence will go up.
Now, at this point of time, the way the fighting seems to be going, it does not appear that it may end anytime soon. What do you think will be the Russian objective here? There are also talks which could take place between Russia and Ukraine. Do you think peace could be the outcome of the talks that are slated to be held between Russia and Ukraine?
So probably not, right? I mean, the Russians only started a few days ago, right? I mean, I would be pretty surprised if Putin sort of threw in the towel or made concessions this early. I mean, it's an operation of this scale doesn't get put together quickly. Putin's pretty clearly been thinking about it for a while. So my guess is, particularly since the odds are so asymmetric, I presume that Putin wants to sort of try to win. right? But if he needs to flush in more forces. Like I said, I think in a couple of weeks, if the Russians are still bogged down, I think there might be a little bit more room to move. My guess is the negotiations in Belarus that have been sort of on the news in the last couple of days, in the last 24 hours, that's probably for our consumption on the outside to make it look like the Russians are flexible. It's pretty clear, I think, what Putin wants. I mean, if you sort of watch that press conference he gave like a week ago, I think he wants regime change. He wants Zelensky out and some kind of a puppet government in Kyiv that will bring Ukraine back into Moscow's orbit.
But Russia has experimented with friendly regimes in Kiev before. That is what happened in 2014 as well, and that has clearly failed, and that is the reason why we are here. Do you think if that is what the Russian objective is, to install a friendly government in Kiev towards Moscow, that is likely to have any kind of a long-term impact in terms of peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, I think that's really sort of the core question. I don't think too many people disagree that the Russians are going to win a battlefield victory. The Ukrainians are doing better than people expected, and I'm certainly not an expert on what the Ukrainians can deploy. But I mean, the differences in force levels are so high that I think the balance of opinion is still that the Russians will win. So once they do, if they do in the next week or two or month or whatever, then they put in this some quisling government, and then are they going to face a resistance? And I think that's really sort of the core issue, particularly for outside governments that are sort of supportive, particularly for the West. Right? Do we support some kind of insurgency in Ukraine? Will the Ukrainians launch an insurgency? You know, they fought against the Nazis pretty hard during World War II as partisans. Will they do that again against the Russians? And if they do, should we support them? Like I said, we're already giving them weapons. And if the Ukrainian, sort of the image of Ukraine on television is sort of heroic and, old ladies fighting against tanks. I mean, if that's the image the world has, there will be enormous sympathy to support a Ukrainian insurgency in the coming months.
Now, looking at how the West has, of course, reacted, it's not that the Russian invasion to Ukraine happened out of the blue. There was a clear build-up, at least from the middle of November. People around the world were aware that Russia had amassed well over 100,000 soldiers along the borders with Ukraine. Are you disappointed in the manner in which the West has, in fact, tried to put forth a united front? It's now starting to ratchet up the sanctions, but in the weeks leading up to the invasion itself, very little was, in fact, done.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, now that we know absolutely that the Russians went in, would have been better if we'd given the Ukrainians more. But I mean, that's sort of anachronistic judgment, right? I don't think it's really fair to sort of like condemn Biden or the Germans or the Poles or something like that with information we have today for decisions they made a few months ago. Everybody's pretty clearly nervous about U.S. or NATO soldiers engaging Russian soldiers on the ground or in the air, right? That's why a no-fly zone, for example, is not going to happen. I mean, the level of escalation threat is just too great, and everybody's really aware. And I think that was ultimately the constraint on Biden. I mean, you can argue sort of, I suppose, on the margins that Biden could have done more here or there, but I don't think that Biden seriously could have deterred this because ultimately his options were limited to A, by the escalation possibility. The Russians have nuclear weapons, of course, and B, quite honestly, by public opinion. Western publics, and does anybody in India want to march into Ukraine and help them? No. I mean, public opinion just isn't there. I think there's public opinion support to give the Ukrainians assistance, but not to actually go toe-to-toe with the Russians on the battlefield. The government, Western publics just aren't there.
All right. We'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kelly, for joining us from South Korea and getting us all those insights into this crisis, which at this point of time doesn't look like could end anytime very soon. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.